Okay, so here we go. I just set the display to output 1080p out through the mini DisplayPort. I rebooted the system and now it doesn't even get to the login screen. I also just tried to plug in the HDMI port to see if I can show any display at all. So I just wanted to try and see if anything's actually visible, but there's no output coming through any of those display ports. It's not coming out through HDMI and it's not coming out through the display port. So right now, that system state is totally unknown. I heard the chime on startup. I have no idea what's happened. Seems to be, it's stuck in hardware. I'm sure if I turn this off and I turn it on again, now don't worry about those sounds, by the way, sorry, that's from my other Mac. I'm going to unplug the HDMI and I'm going to try and just boot only using the mini DisplayPort. I'm going to make sure that I set the right display input. The mini DisplayPort is plugged into the DisplayPort input. By the way, this was working before I hit the reboot. Before I went to reboot through the menu. So now we're just going to try to boot using the mini DisplayPort. Sorry, I have to press and hold to turn it off. There it goes, and now I'm going to boot. Now I wouldn't expect to see anything for a while because normally we don't see anything through the DisplayPort until it hits the login screen. Don't worry about those sounds, by the way, that's my other Mac, just running some macros. So again, this seems like the same problem. I would have expected it to hit the login screen by now, but it has not succeeded. So now I'm going to go to HDMI, I'll turn it off. Okay, it's off. And we're just going to go to HDMI now. And we're going to boot. Oh, there you go, pink display. So, I'd already changed the display output to not be 4K. The display output was set to 1080p. It was successfully doing that before any of this stuff happened. I've rebooted the Mac and we weren't able to hit the login screen using the mini DisplayPort at all. And now after going to HDMI, we are at the login screen, but it's clear that the display output is all messed up. There's clearly video drawing errors. So now I'm going to log in. Usually after this point, those display errors go away. So this is through the HDMI port we've managed to boot up, but there are display errors, and regardless of what you're doing with that mini display port, you should be allowed to use it without causing such serious hardware failure. So we're back. Now let's see if I can replicate it. It's intermittent. I'm not always able to replicate these issues, so now last time we were like this. I was able to successfully plug in this, and I'm going to check the input and go to DisplayPort. It's all working. Unfortunately, it's defaulted back to 4K, so that's not cool. I guess because it didn't successfully reboot, that it's gone to its last known OK configuration. So I'm going to set this to 1080p. Okay, there we go. .1080p. Let's do a restart. Now, this restart is different because, sorry about the plane. This restart is different because this time when I restart, I'm going to leave both display outputs connected. It's probably going to be okay, I suspect. Would have normally have expected it to hit the login screen, but I guess because we've got two displays connected, we are only seeing output that's going to come through the HDMI. So I'm doing that. Okay, so we can log in. So maybe we're starting to learn something here. I think that, okay, there's another hardware rendering issue. But I think that we're starting to be able to get somewhere in identifying how to replicate this issue reliably. It looks like if you're using both HDMI and the display port, let's go back to the display port. Okay, cool. So now it's remembered its display settings. It's still set to 1080p, so that's good. 1080p and 1080p. and it looks like things are okay so long as we have both the DisplayPort and the HDMI port connected. So we're just going to reboot again for good measure to show that that's stable, and then I want to try and see if I can reliably replicate only having the DisplayPort connected. And this Mac should be able to use the DisplayPort exclusively because that port is capable of putting out higher resolution up to 2560 pixels in width by, I forget what dimension in height, but the mini DisplayPort on the Mac Mini is rated to a higher resolution output than the HDMI, so it's reasonable that a user should be able to only use the mini DisplayPort rather than the HDMI if they choose. Okay, so we should be in the same situation as before, which is that we're only going to get output through the HDMI as long as it's plugged in. Okay, cool. As we were expecting, that's great. Now I am going to switch over to the mini DisplayPort output, verify that it works okay. I'm going to unplug the HDMI output so that I can exclusively use the mini DisplayPort output. So we're going to go to DisplayPort. And so now we're on the DisplayPort. So I'm going to unplug the HDMI. So we're going back to a single screen mode. We're not outputting through multiple display outputs right now. It's all good. You can see the Mac is treating this as a single display. So now I'm going to restart. There you go. Okay, that's interesting. We just did a restart. We had 2 reboots. That's not to be expected. That should not happen. Any Mac hardware should be totally fine with you unplugging a second display and rebooting it. I've never seen another Mac of mine behave in that way. So we don't really know where the system is at this point. It might be at a login screen, it might not be. Even though I can't see anything, I'm going to try and type in my password and see if that gets me anywhere, but I'm pretty sure that it has not even got to the login screen. And the only other way to see if it's currently stable is for me to plug the HDMI port back in, because it's not displaying the login screen. Now, I have successfully in the past been able to reboot and output and use a single output from the mini DisplayPort. but currently I'm not able to do that. So in order to, you know, see if we've actually hit a login screen, which I don't think we have, but if the system was stable, it should allow me to plug in a second display. And I should be able to check the HDMI port. I'm sure that this is totally not the case, because that just doesn't seem normal, does it? But we have no display. We've got no output from the HDMI port right now. So we've just seen the double reboot issue again, and it's probably hung there in the boot sequence somewhere. So what I'm going to do is, look, I'm pretty sure normally, like whenever I've gotten to this situation, whenever I've plugged in just the display port, that reliably creates the purple display issue. I'm going to just reboot it with both plugs connected this time, which I haven't done before after I've seen a crash like this. But let's just see what happens. There we go, we got the purple display. So it seems like we can pretty reliably create this fail condition right now. If I only want to use the mini display port, it will do this. So now I'm going to restart again with both plugs connected. And I would expect, you know, this to be okay. It's probably going to boot fine. Remember, we're displaying through the display port, so we should see the Apple logo just as we did, and that's all good. This time I am not going to unplug the mini display port while the system's booted. I'm going to try changing the removing the plug only after it's shut down. Don't worry about that sound, that's my other Mac. Okay, so we're shut down. Still shutting down.
Well, that's weird. So we just hit shutdown, but it didn't actually shut down. I don't know what the hell's going on there. That's really weird. I mean, maybe that's just what the Mac Mini does. It just displays a dim flashing light. But there's definitely nothing coming out through the display anymore. Look, I'm just gonna check. This is annoying. I'm just gonna make sure that that's normal. So I've just hit the on button. I'm not gonna change anything in the configuration this time. Just want to make sure that that shutdown process actually didn't screw up on me. But yeah, now it's not actually. We don't know where it is again. We are using 2 display outputs at the moment. I attempted to shut down the system. There's nothing coming out of the displays, but the system is just flashing. And it appears that the system hasn't actually shut down because it can't be turned on either. Oh, wait. That's a change in state. Maybe that's... Okay, hopefully it's booting. That's... I don't know what's going on now. Can't explain it. The light turns on for a few moments and then it just goes back to flashing again. And there's no display output through the HDMI, which is normally supposed to be just rock solid. So the system has hung in some weird state. I'm just going to press and hold it to force power it down. And I'm going to boot again. So it seems like this is some other weird issue. I've not seen this before, but I've never really tried to test shutting down the machine completely that much while I've been trying to debug these kinds of problems. So it just may be indicative of some other problem with the firmware. So we've got both outputs connected and we are displaying the HDMI input, and right now it looks like we can't even post, or rather we heard a startup chime, so we got that far, but it's not displaying anything out through the display input. And we just get a flashing light now. So, you know, this is super weird. Again, none of these hardware issues should be happening just from users plugging in screens into their computers. I shouldn't have even had to go this far, because if someone's plugging in a screen, it's not acceptable for their hardware to be behaving this way. So now I'm going to unplug the Thunderbolt, the mini display port, and hopefully we can just boot up off the HDMI. We'll probably get our usual weird graphics issues when we do that, which is the purple display.
And that's what usually happens when we've attempted to use the Thunderbolt port. Oh, okay, we didn't get it that time. So I don't know what's up with that. So we haven't shed too much more light on the issue, other than I was able to replicate the problem without using 4K going through the display. Using the Thunderbolt port through this device at all, or the mini display port at all, to try and drive a display, especially if you're trying to drive a display exclusively through that port, which you should be able to do, is not able to be done on this Mac Mini, and a Mac Mini should be able to use that display port.